So let's talk about some mighty heroes, xenos commanders and foul despots of chaos, with a look at one of the single strongest battlefield commanders for each faction in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Warhammer 40k army commanders and an overview of some of the best leaders for each faction in the game. For this one I thought I'd mainly focus on leader units and character units that can help out their army in one way or another, either buffing their squads to make their damage output very scary, or leading by example and charging into the fight and taking out plenty of the enemies in their own right. Given I just did a video focusing on lone operative characters at the weekend, I thought for this one I'd broadly focus on units that aren't lone operatives, even if plenty of them are rather excellent and kind of auto-include for various different factions out there, and perhaps mainly focusing on things that can lead units as opposed to stand beside them or great big combat monsters, as again they feel like a bit of a different sort of class of character. For some factions, maybe one character just stands a bit more obviously above the rest in terms of in-game power for the points cost. For other factions, realistically, you could have chosen one of a whole number of different models. I'll aim just to talk through one strong choice for each faction that you could easily argue to be one of the strongest choices for each faction, and then mention a few honourable mentions that might have got close, are also very efficient, and see lots of play in competitive lists. As ever, if you were looking to pick up any of these efficient commanders or Warhammer miniatures in general, feel free to check out the channel's affiliate discount retailers in the video description. They save a bit of money versus Games Workshop while not costing you any more to buy, and any sales after clicking the links in the video description below help to support the channel a bit and keep the Auspex Tactics videos coming. A big thanks to anyone using them. Let's jump into it though, and we'll start out with the Imperium and then go through Chaos and Xenos. For the Imperium, we've got the Space Marines, probably for sheer power and value for the points cost. Ethon Shan of the Raven Guard might have been the choice, though given them focusing on non-lone operatives, I'm going to pass up talking about him or the Combi Lieutenant, and then that probably means one of the Ultramarine special characters, either Marneus Calgar or Rabute Guilliman. Both of them are very powerful for the Ultramarines and consistent staples in competitive lists. I decided to go for Marneus Calgar here, fielded alongside his Victrix Honor Guards, 12 wounds total between the three of them at a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, and split over several models. The Victrix Guard not only add their strength 5 damage 2 damage profiles to the unit, but can also tank hits for the squad as well. With that 2+ save and 4+ invulnerable save, they're often going to be the ones to take damage on first, as they might be getting a far better save than an average Company Hero squad member perhaps. The Company Heroes tends to be the most common pairing with them. You get 4 extra bodies with 4 wounds apiece, and then -1 to wound on the unit, which makes them really quite tanky, and the Company Heroes have a bit of damage threat themselves, including the Company Champion for more melee. Between that you get a unit that's genuinely really quite tough to take down, and has enough melee to bully a fair few units, with Calgar's damage 3 twin linked attacks. Then beyond that, Calgar rustles up a command point per turn, always great added value, and he allows the units to advance shoot and charge and fall back shoot and charge, so kind of all the doctrines in one. And it means that they get a longer threat range than most foot-slogging infantry, and you can't just lock them up in melee without them having the chance to charge something else or charge in to regain fights first again. Overall hard to go wrong with for the Ultramarines, and Calgar and Guilliman are definitely still good in combo, even if the presence of Guilliman means that Calgar won't be generating that command point every turn. Otherwise, beyond the lone operatives for the Space Marines, for generic characters it could have been perhaps the Judiceer with Blade Guard, nice to have fights first on a generally dangerous unit. The Gravis Captain's quite nice, particularly with the Artificer armor in Gladius Task Force where you could run solo. Kayvan Shrike's kind of both a lone operative and a leader, often running around with 10 Vanguard veterans protected from shooting. And Guilliman himself of course is pretty immense, having double oath a moment and free stratagems for units nearby. Next up for the Astra Militarum, and the one I chose for them was the Cadian Command Squad, discounting Gaunt's Ghosts as their lone operatives, and the Rogel Dawn Tank Commander, as that feels a bit more of a direct damage dealer gun tank as opposed to a leader choice. The Command Squad's still a bit of a weird one though, given that it kind of has most of its value due to pairing with other characters that you can get out there. So you're likely to see it with a Cadian Shock Troop squad, and then either joined to Ursula Creed, Lord Solar Leontus, or maybe a Cadian Castellan if they're fighting on the front line. Due to their flexibility though, you're more likely to see them in any one guard list than either Ursula Creed or Lord Solar Leontus, as both of those generally want the command squad to back them up. For your 65 points you get 4 guardsmen and the 3 wound company commander, which does add a little to the weight of numbers of a guard squad and has a few more bodies to chew through. And the way that they support the main hero is the Master Vox. It allows you to broadcast their order somewhere within 24 inches, and then if you have either Lord Solar or Ursula Creed with their flexible orders, they can also be broadcast over the airwaves, so you have 4 units out of 1 squad. If you have Lord Solar, then his orders can affect tanks and super heavies as well, and you could put Grand Strategist in the unit if you're playing combined arms detachment for 1 more order at long range. They'll be joined to a squad of Cadian shock troops, which will grant the unit sticky objectives, so quite nice to hold the home field. They can mean that you've got some serious OC presence on that with the regimental banner, and then later game, if the opponent's not likely to be able to threaten the home field, they can move up and start to fight for the midboard, knowing that the home field remains yours. Beyond that, their unit gets cover when they're within range of an objective. That helps make guard squads tougher. They've got a medipack to heal D3 models, which is genuinely quite a good added value, as there's a fair chance that the squad gets damaged but not outright killed, and they can actually hit back with a surprising amount of punch in melee. Both the company commander and a veteran guardsman can take a power fist, and that means that you get 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2 on the melee side of things, which is more than you might expect out of a guard squad. Overall, pretty great value when supporting either Lord Solar or Ursula Kreese. I feel like for rivals for being talked about as top leader unit for the guard, they'd be the other two obvious ones to focus on. Creed with discounted stratagems and lots of orders, and Lord Solar with free command points and lots of orders. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold, one option for Warhammer 40K magnetic storage with their range of magnetic carry cases. Magnetic storage now seems to have become the most popular way to get model soldiers from A to B, attaching magnets to the bottom of the bases of your miniatures and then putting them on metal sheets within the storage, which means they'll remain held in place, and you can rank up lots of miniatures next to each other in close proximity, though they're not going to be damaging each other by banging on them. Tabletop Stronghold's take on this are their mag cases, basically made of very sturdy MDF that's hard to break or damage. And then in those MDF boxes go ranks of steel trays, and those trays can be raised or lowered depending on the height of the miniatures that you're storing. Then on the front of the box, to keep everything safe, is an acrylic sheet, which is handy enough to be able to see what's where without having to open it, and also display your handiwork when it's in transport. Broadly speaking, reviews I've seen about these have been pretty positive around Reddit and places, and I have seen them handle customer service things rather well in the past. As well as their cases, they also have some MDF terrain on offer as well, if that's of interest to you, coming at a small discount if you buy a mag case. If you'd like to check out their stuff, they'll be down in the video description, and otherwise I'll cycle back to them briefly at the end of the video to talk through their range for those interested. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Next up for the Adeptus Custodes, I went with the Blade Champion. It still maybe feels rather standout versus the rest. 120 points for a 6 wound character with toughness 6, a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save. And then it's just nice and straightforward to use, adding damage on his own profile and then helping deliver his unit to melee. His damage is really quite general purpose, either 6 attacks at strength 7 and damage 2 if you want the sort of Guardian Spear equivalent, an anti-horde mode with more attacks but at strength 5, AP 1 and damage 1, or perhaps the most interesting and powerful in a 5 attack profile with strength 6, AP 3 and damage 3 with devastating wounds. Generally that's going to be the one to go for against any sort of tough stuff, unless you desperately want precision, which the first profile gets. The AP 3 and damage 3 just help out with a lot of things that Custodes might actually struggle with, really big tough vehicles that have lots of wounds or 3 wound infantry, and he'll be buffed by Martial Qatar for lethal or sustained hits, plus any detachment buffs that you might have going, such as Lines of the Emperor +1 to wound or shield host. Then he helps deliver your unit into melee. You get 2 reroll charge rolls with him, so might save a command point reroll or 2 there, or just have flat extra chance of making long charges. And his once per game ability is to advance and charge, quite a big deal for a very mighty melee unit that's going to be foot-slonging its way towards the midfield. He often tends to get paired with Custodian Wardens, as they get big defense with characters on board, and might be able to charge up, destroy something, and then weather the enemy storm. With Custodian Guard getting as cheap as they are now though, there's a bit more temptation to use them as well. Finally, he could use some enhancements from certain detachments, maybe the Adamantine Talisman and Solar Spearhead being a particularly standout one. Otherwise, for rivals for him, the Shield Captain variants, particularly with the Lines of the Emperor enhancements, are fairly good. Also with mighty melee stat lines and getting discounted stratagems are nice. Trajan Valoris is interesting in Lines of the Emperor, with the ability to fight twice and then bank that once per game ability for another usage. I still probably rate the Blade Champion as top dog overall though. The Imperial Knights are a bit of a weird one for this particular one, given that most of their datasheets are just big stompy characters in their own right. For interpreting a leader or commander, I decided to go for maybe one of the knights that's the strongest with the spearhead at arms, which is now a detachment that's genuinely played in competitive play around the multi-bondsman buffed armigers. Each knight can use the bondsman ability on 3 rather than 1, and that just makes it far more of an actual interesting decision and something to weigh up. For this one I have chosen to go with the new Knight Defender. He's got a good bondsman ability, having the Warden's previous one, giving a -1 to damage for armigers that move up to the midboard. You can potentially hand that out to 3 armiger warglaves if you want to, though probably just 1 or 2 would often be sufficient. And then they can go and contest the midboard objectives, giving the opponent really quite a tanky, small expendable knights to take down in return. While he's doing that, you might be able to buff them further with any other enhancements or stratagems that you might use on them. Beyond that, his big guns are really quite solid damage. The great big conversion beam is pretty nasty in general purpose. If you can keep it outside of 18 inches on its targets, it'll land a lot of hits at damage 4 there, and its plasma weapon will stack the wounds at high AP and damage 3. It's definitely capable of putting some big damage on heavy vehicles and elite infantry. Then finally it gets its shield rules with its 4+ invulnerable save for the knight itself, which means that it's going to be harder to take down than several of its rivals, and you might be able to confer that to knights behind it, though I feel like that's maybe a little bit more of a niche rule, as you just might not be able to stack all the knights in one part of the table, or it might not be a good idea to. Overall, it's a strong general purpose knight if you want to lead the armigers into battle. For rivals within that detachment, maybe the Knight Castigator is one of the more obvious ones. He can give sustained hits 1 and AP -1 to Helverin firepower, which is really quite scary, particularly with the other buffs that you can get from Spearhead at arms. Or if just treating the knights as characters in their own right, you just talk about the generically strong ones, Canis Rex, the Knight Atropos and the Lancer, and maybe the Crusader and Castellan, maybe being a little bit more scary than the average on the curve. Next up, we've got the Grey Knights, and while they've had some characters removed from their roster, Castellan Crow went from being fairly usable pre-Codex to downright strong after. A 5-wound character with the Grey Knight 2+ saves, joining Purifiers. For his 90 points he has some melee, but mainly helps out with Purifying Flame. In close combat he has 5 attacks at Strength 6, AP 2 and Damage 2 with Precision, so able to single out some enemy characters. He personally gets to reroll hit rolls against character datasheets for a small extra damage buff there. And as he's normally going to be leading Purifiers, he should get some wound rerolls too, either reroll wound rolls of 1 or all wound rolls. Then finally he buffs Purifying Flame. He gets 3 attacks for himself at Strength 4, AP 2 and Damage 1 with Anti-Infantry 2+, adding Norse cover. And then his special rule is to add +1 to every profile like that in the squad, so that's overall 24 when you've added an extra one onto his one as well. With that profile and the Purifier rerolls built in, it's just going to obliterate the vast majority of infantry squads out there, never mind anything extra they get from their Stormbolters. And with full rerolls to wound against things on objectives being a possibility, it's not out of the question to stack a good amount of damage on tough stuff too. It further helps him a bit that Wartbane Task Force is really quite good right now. That has a big Purifier focus and plenty of synergies, though just given his datasheet strength he's going to be powerful wherever he's placed. Otherwise for rivals, the Grey Knights don't have too much right now. The Grandmaster Dread Knight is a character choice that's fairly equally played, but they're more of a solo damage dealer than a leader really. And otherwise the Brotherhood Librarian's fairly efficient. A fair bit of damage with Vortex of Doom, and he can either function as a leader or run solo as a nuisance distraction deep strike character. For the Imperial Agents, I went with Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, both useful in a pure Agents army and as an ally to the Custodes. She's 75 points or 95 for fielded as allies, and is a 4-wound Inquisitor that can join Imperium Battle Line Infantry or RBT's Navy Breachers plus some others in Codex. She mainly brings 2 things to the table: weirdly good shooting at 18 inches to stack a whole bunch of wounds on infantry, 4 attacks with damage 2 with her Shuriken Catapult, with anti-infantry 4+ and devastating wounds, so a pretty reasonable chance to destroy at least some infantry with that shooting there, and then some sustained hits 2 attacks at strength 6 and damage 2. The other thing is to prevent her units being shot outside of 18 inches, so long range firepower won't be able to take aim at her squad, and that can be kind of disruptive for the enemy. And then she gives her unit a +1 to hit against Xenos, and has a little bit of melee power as well. In Agents, she can be another nuisance board control unit to deal with that can't be dealt with units at long range, and also push back on the enemy a bit. In Adeptus Custodes though, she often gets a place alongside the Custodian Guards that went down in cost recently. Their special rules can allow her to shoot twice once per game, and also reroll wound rolls if you're within range of an objective, and that can mean that her shooting is just weirdly scary with 20 attacks, either hitting on a 3+ or a 2+ potentially, and rerolling all those wound rolls to stack loads of damage 2 saves on the enemy. Otherwise, for rivals within the Imperial Agents, within their actual armies using their codex, the Rogue Trader entourage is probably worth a shout out for Imperialis Fleet. You can bear the Imperialis Fleet enhancements there, and they're able to infiltrate alongside some Navy Breachers and basically stop any enemy infiltrators dropping in the entire mid-board, and then after deployment has happened, use their redeploy rule to put them somewhere more sensible. Otherwise, the regular Inquisitor is fairly cheap and farms command points pretty well. Not completely reliably, but getting one back on a 3+ really isn't too bad. For some armies that don't have their own command point generation, that's pretty reasonable for a cheap cost character. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus, and given the big changes, it could only really be Belisarius' call. Not actually a leader unit that can join units, but I feel like with his big buff options, he is near enough to count. He's 175 points now, and for that you get a 10-wound character with toughness 8 a 2+ save, and a 4+ invulnerable, and the ability to heal his own wounds if he gets damaged. He wants to be in the heart of an AdMech formation, where he gets lone operative if he's within 3 inches of other units. He does have some of his own damage output, 3 attacks at strength 14 and damage d6 at close range with the Solar Atomizer. That gets a big melter 3 if you're very close up as well. And then a trio of melee profiles, overall making him better at clearing sort of light to medium infantry than tough stuff. His really big thing is the AdMech style Oath of Moment though. Mark your unit for reroll hits for your whole army in your command phase. A hugely impactful buff there that just makes the AdMech overall stronger as a faction, the main thing that's propelled them to be arguably the strongest faction in Warhammer 40k right now, and it basically makes him an auto-include in competitive lists currently. Overall, between that fairly godly buff plus being overall chunky and dangerous, it's basically impossible to go wrong with. He can trade out the big rerolls for either the battle line buff and a bit of OC or leadership for a turn, or stealth aura if it makes more sense to do that with nothing major to attack this turn, or maybe towards the end of the game where surviving might be more important. Otherwise, for competitors for him, it'd probably be the Tech Priest Manipulus for a leader character, often paired with breaches to make them fairly fantastically general purpose with their lethal hits. The destroyers have got very strong as well with call around, very nice to be able to use them alongside the reroll hit rolls, and if you're playing Hunter Cohort specifically, then the Skitarii Marshals also worth a shout, having a lot of the detachment synergies based around them. For the Adepta Sororitas, again I feel like it's got to be the faction commander in more than Val for the single most standouts. She's 170 points and will be fighting alongside 3 Paragon Warsuits for 210 more, making a big expensive 380 point unit that can absolutely annihilate large chunks of the enemy army, both at range and in melee. They have a bunch of multi-melters and general purpose melee attacks. For Val personally, she has Fidelis, a heavy bolter, plus a couple of big missile shots, and then the Lance of Illumination in melee with 5 attacks at strength 8, AP 2, damage 3, and devastating wounds. If you expend a miracle dice, then you can increase the attacks of Fidelis or the Lance, recycling that dice if she happens to destroy a unit at the end of the phase, which is definitely possible with her buffs on the go. Speaking of which, the single biggest thing that she brings is 4 rerolls to hit and wound for that unit, so there's a good chance that the Paragon Warsuits convert the vast majority of their hits and wounds to saves for the enemy, wounding smaller stuff pretty easily anyway, and then wounding big tanks and vehicles really quite easily due to the Paragon Warsuit special rule. You also get some additional synergies from Champions of Faith and Hallowed Martyrs. Champions has the Paragon Warsuits as a central unit, Hallowed Martyrs having some interesting melee manipulation, but in particular being able to resurrect more than Val from death is a massive deal. Very scary to have such a big hitting model revive after you put it down once, or ready to go after another unit. For rivals for the sisters, maybe the Canoness and Palatine would be other big ones, both standard sized leaders, both with decent damage and a good buffing rule, each in their own way. Juna Theresa is rather nice, rustling up command points and having some threat with her other profiles as well, and maybe Hospitalers if you're running the Celestian Sacrosancts, they're often considered worth it in a 10 strong squad. Finally, for the Imperium, we've got the Divergent Chapter Space Marines, and for the Blood Angels, after the last balance updates, it's probably the Jump Captain, who I think deserves the win for them at the moment, despite not being a unique Blood Angels datasheet. He is a 5-wound Captain model who can lead the Sanguinary Guard, or potentially Jump Intercessors or Vanguard Veterans if you're not using them for a more sort of skirmish utility role. I probably would have put Dante in first, but given the Sanguinary Guard changes, he no longer gives them a +1 to hit that's effective anymore, as they already hit on a 2. He does a good job of making the Sanguinary Guard hit harder though. The discounted stratagems that he brings are solid value. There's plenty that Blood Angels want to use in Liberator Assault Group with Advance and Charge, or the Lethal Hits and Lance one. He has his own melee profile to add to the mix, 5 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2 with a fist or hammer, and he gives his unit +1 strength on the charge as well, pretty handy against certain targets. And for his profile himself in Liberator Assault Group, that's going to make him strength 11, which will be very nice for hitting tougher tanks and monsters. Beyond Liberator, having Jump Captains might be an even bigger deal in the Angelic Inheritors. That's the one that's all very character focused, so lots of their best synergies are locked to character units only, as well as the core rule giving you some reroll 1s to hit and wound, so a good damage buff in his own right there. For other possibles and rivals for the Blood Angels, Dante himself is still very usable, though not quite as standout as he used to be. The Martyrs is strong if you want the big power unit that is a 10 strong squad of Death Company jump packs. The standard Captain datasheet with Rage Fueled Warrior for sustained hits, maybe leading some Assault Intercessors or perhaps Stern Guard can be a really big scary unit. And if we were counting lone operatives for this one, then the Sanguinor and Mephiston would certainly be in the mix. For the Dark Angels, their leader choice seems far more obvious than most, as it's been basically all addition. Azrael is great value with 115 points, a 6-wound Chapter Master with toughness 4, and then basically having 4 good things that he adds to his unit. And then unit datasheets where he's got quite a lot of flexibility. There's genuinely good arguments for putting him with about 5 different squads. First up, he generates 1 command point per turn, which is always a good start. Maybe gives you a bit more incentive to put him on the board rather than in a transport. His own melee might not be quite on the same level as certain chapter masters, though it's still punchy enough. 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 4 and damage 2 with devastating wounds. It'll certainly slice through a few enemy Space Marine equivalents. Plus he does have a fairly punchy combi plasma shot as well that's got a good chance to blast through invulnerable saves for infantry. Then he gets not 1 but 2 really good squad buffs, granting sustained hits 1 to his units, and that helps out just about every Space Marine damage dealer. Reliable extra damage that also applies to his own profiles. And then finally he gives a 4+ invulnerable save to his unit. Very nice for those with a 3+ armor save at base, and that's a big deal to make a squad far more tanky for everything that isn't Blade Guard veterans, I guess. Put that together and there's great arguments for running him with all sorts of units. The Inner Circle companions love that 4+ invulnerable save on big chunky 3 wound models, and they'll like the sustained hits as well. Hellblasters really enjoy the 4+ invulnerable save and sustained hits, and they can be good in plenty of places, including Wrath of the Rock. Sternguard veterans are an interesting one, again enjoying the 4+ invulnerable save, the sustained hits, but also with their special rule you get to reroll all hits and wounds against the target, and that applies to Azrael himself, so the squad can buff him as he buffs the squad. And then both the standard intercessors have interest as well. The assault intercessors are a nice cheap 75 points, so you're not spending too many resources if he wants to hang back and generate command points for a few turns, and then late game push towards the midboard where they buff his melee with rerolls. And finally the regular intercessor squad gives you sticky objectives for doing the same thing, so it could be nice enough to have him on the home objective and then late game push forward towards the midboard, where again they'll still be a somewhat dangerous unit with all of those shots with sustained hits on them and being harder to kill than normal with the invulnerable save. He's certainly a guy that's got lots of choices and is in basically every single Dark Angels competitive list. Otherwise he doesn't really have a ton of rivals for the Unforgiven. Maybe Lionel Johnson himself, though is more of a solo fighter as opposed to a buffing model. I guess he could help out with melee for nearby Deathwing Knights or something. Or otherwise maybe the Judaseer with Inner Circle companions. Getting fights first on a threatening unit like that is a big deal. For the Deathwatch it probably had to be either the Watchmaster, Judaseer or the Gravis Captain. If you're going Deathwatch datasheets only, then it'd probably be the Watchmaster, but given how great the Indomitor kill team is, plus the Watchmaster maybe having a bit of competition from the Judaseer for his role, I've given the Gravis Captain the win here. He's 80 points for a 6 wound Space Marine Captain at toughness 6, who leads the big and chunky Indomitor kill team, who have 3 aggressors and 3 eradicators in them, the rest being made up of heavy intercessors with boosted bolt rifles. They have scary shooting, gaining additional strength against the nearest targets. They were already a good unit and then went down in points cost with the last balance update, and the Gravis Captain can support them rather well with discounted stratagems, giving you some solid value. They're good targets for the Teleportarium and special issue ammunition stratagems, and by being in that unit you could apply those free stratagems to multiple units at the same time. Then personally he has a little bit of shooting, and then quite good melee damage. He gets a bunch of power fist attacks and then some bonus ones, choosing one of 3 different profiles. And beyond that he's a particularly good choice to bear enhancements within Blackspear. The Thief of Secrets to boost his melee damage all around, making him way more scary, and that applies to the bonus profile too, making the Chainsword a weirdly good choice. Or he could take the Tome of Ectoclades for some big rerolls, getting a second copy of Oath of Moment once per game. He's maybe a little bit more likely to survive once his squad gets taken down, with his half damage rule as well. Otherwise though, I could have fairly equally happily talked about the Watchmaster, again discounted stratagems and better movement for the Deathwatch veterans. A recent points cut didn't hurt for him as well, and the Judaseer also leads veterans well as well. Fights first with a bunch of heavy Thunderhammer profiles, and the unit can make them an intimidating target to deal with. It'd also be quite a good target for the Thief of Secrets enhancement, or maybe the Beacon Angelus. For the Space Wolves, we've got the Great Wolf himself in Logan Grimnar, perhaps having a bit more competition for best leader with a few others. The Space Wolves have got several good leaders. He easily does enough to make the cut in a whole bunch of lists though. An 8 wound character model that can join the Wolfguard Terminators, which are a good datasheet with their defensive rules, storm shields and mastercrafted power weapons, and he has a nice punchy melee damage profile with 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 3, a sweep profile, and then bonus attacks from his wolves. Aside from his stats, he gets 2 main abilities, a first turn reserves arrival either for himself or another unit, and that does mean that if you really wanted, you could put quite a big unit of Wolfguard Terminators on the board right from turn 1, not necessarily reliably delivered into melee or anything like that, but more just set up in an aggressive position. His other rule is his command point debuff aura, again annoying for enemies wanting to do stratagems within 12 inches of his big base, and there's at least a pretty reasonable chance that that might be somewhere disruptive if he's fighting over the midfield with some Terminators in tow. Overall he's pretty solidly strong. He'll do well with any of the detachments that buff melee in their various different ways, including the Saga of the Beast Slayer, and can work well enough either in a squad of Terminators or running completely solo if you fancy it. Otherwise, for near rivals for the Space Wolves, Ragnar Blackmane's very good, really quite strong and scary damage output when leading a squad of Bloodclaws. The Wolfguard Battle Leader with Wolf Touched in Saga of the Beastslayer is very nice as well. He can grant rerolls and sustained hits to the Wolfen with hammers, and otherwise maybe Bjorn the Fell-Handed and Ayak Rockfist are worth a shout. Finally, for the Imperium, we have the Black Templars, and for their standout leader characters, I had to give it to the pairing of the Marshal and Castellan, probably the single biggest rival for the title being the Emperor's Champion himself. He can be a lone operative going solo, but does well leading assault intercessors. For the Marshal and Castellan though, they're generally used as a pair, and typically lead small squads of Sword Brethren. Both they and their squad get really quite similar damage profiles, all with mastercrafted power weapons. Between the Marshal and Castellan, you have 14 attacks hitting on a 2+, at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2, all with lethal hits, and then depending on the side of the Sword Brethren squad that you go for, they add an extra 12 or 15 or so. Just literally with those profiles alone, they're already quite a scary unit. The profile's good against lighter units, the lethal hits means they're good against tough stuff, and the Black Templars get a +1 to wound against anything that's toughness 5 or more with them. Then for the character's actual buffs, the Marshal makes critical hits go off on a 5+, so everything that hits on a 5 or more will auto-wound, and he might get an extra attack or 2 depending on if there's more enemy units nearby. Then the Castellan grants rerolling hit rolls of 1, boosted to full hit rerolls if he can pass a leadership test, and often against tough targets that's going to mean it will make sense to reroll everything that isn't a 5+, so the vast majority of your attacks should auto-wound against the opponent. Between those two, that's a pretty enormous damage combo, and the Castellan even has the chance to farm a command point when they destroy a unit as well. I feel like on several units that might be a bit hopeful, but given it's a big central damage combo that rules in, there's a good chance they happen to do that as they go about doing what they wanted to anyway. Even without any external buffs from detachments or anything, their damage output is huge, with average rolling and 4 Sword Brethren around 5 slain Terminators, or about 22 wounds to a Knight profile. Easy to see why they're often included in multiples in Templar army lists. Otherwise, for rivals for them though, the Emperor's Champion with his big damage profile, often going with a squad of Assault Intercessors, and maybe the Honor Vehement in Gladius Task Force. He is quite a force to be reckoned with, and feels like he's fairly even with them in terms of the power. High Marshal Helbrecht really isn't too far behind the Marshal and Castellan as well. If you wanted an even higher threat squad, you could swap out the Marshal for Helbrecht if you'd like, and Helbrecht can do well with other things like Crusader squads too. Moving on to the Forces of Chaos, and first up we have the Chaos Lord for 90 points. He's a 5 wound character with a 4+ invulnerable save, able to lead either Chosen or Legionaries. Typically comes with squads of them, usually fielded jumping out of a Rhino to help them into combat. Like the other captain equivalents, he provides discounted stratagems which are nicely powerful. Most of the strong Chaos Space Marine detachments have an advance and charge option, which is rather good if he's leading Legionaries. Chosen already get that inbuilt, and then you can get damage buffs in various detachments as well, such as the big rerolls that you get after getting out of transports in Renegade Raiders. That's a really good one for Chosen. Then his melee profile is nice enough at base, usually 5 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2 with a demon hammer, and on top of that he'll be boosted by Dark Pact and any detachment buffs he might get, such as Pact Bound Zealots, Renegade Raiders or Creations of Bile. They all have core rules that can help their damage. If he's leading Legionaries, he'll be able to reroll some wounds as well. Wound rolls of 1 going up to 4 wound rerolls if he happens to target something or an objective. Then, like a lot of captains, he has an absolutely enormous damage punch once per game. You basically improve most of his stats by 1, so he goes up to 6 attacks at strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3, so far more capable of tangling with things like Terminators or big tough tanks and monsters that have a lot of wounds. Between all that, you have a Chaos Lord that could account for entire squads of enemies when he charges things on mid-board objectives. Otherwise, for rivals for leaders and characters, Fabius Bile is probably the other really big one who can lead core combo units. He's very efficient with a big ranked up squad of Chosen in particular. Their big bulky profiles and impressive stat lines quite like his damage augmentations, and maybe for other standout characters, Cypher the Lone Operative and the Lord Discordant on Hellstalker, both are strong characters that don't really feel quite so much like leaders. For the Death Guard, I think it would have to be their Lord of Contagion. He's 120 points to add into a squad of Death Shroud Terminators, getting you a 6 wound character with a sturdy toughness 7, a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable. The Death Shroud Terminators have got nice general purpose melee, lots of accurate attacks with damage 2 and lethal hits, and their special rule gives them near enough guaranteed delivery into close combat, being able to drop with a 6-inch deep strike against units that are afflicted. When they get there, the Lord of Contagion tips the balance between them being a unit that's going to do some alright damage against most things, to just flat wiping out a lot of more normal sized 40k targets. His own profile is quite good, with 5 attacks at strength 9, AP 2 and damage 3 and lethal hits, or swapping that out for a sweep profile. Enemies get debuffed by Contagion and Nurgle, so their toughness and saving throws might be a bit weaker than they normally would be. Then on top of that, his core rules give the unit a really big damage boost, Sustained Hits 1 and the Lance keyword, both of which are pretty excellent on top of the already fairly stacked stat lines of the Death Shroud and this guy, plus the Contagion debuffs, and while they're an expensive unit they can certainly kill things of a similar sort of points cost. Then once he gets taken down, he can rise from death on a 2+, coming back with 3 wounds left remaining. Quite a big deal for a model with quite such a scary stat line as he has. And he does have at least a reasonable chance of getting taken down if the opponent enacts some vengeance from the unit that they just lost. Otherwise he does have some good detachment synergy for him and his unit. Mortarian's Hammer can help out for delivery, marking units with Afflictors. The Champions of Contagion have several character locked buffs, and the Lord of Contagion himself can get some good damage enhancements from Virulent Vectorium. Despite points increases, it's unsurprisingly quite common to see multiple squads of Lord of Contagion led Death Shroud Terminators in an army. Otherwise, for rivals for the Death Guard leaders, the Malignant Plague Caster I feel like is pretty standout value leading the Plague Marines, both having a good damage buff and very good damage output of his own. The Biologist Putrefier and Foul Blightspawn are both good there, and quite a lot of the other characters are solid in their own way. The Lord of Virulence conducting some firepower, a Tallyman farming command points, and the Nurgle Demon Prince with a 5+ Feel No Pain in Virulent Vectorium. For their Sorceress rivals in the Thousand Sons, I've decided to go for their regular on-foot Sorcerer, 85 points for a 4-wound character to lead Rubric Marines, and starts out with a profile that's at least fairly tame, though can get absolutely stacked with a massive amount of buffs on it. His base shooting is a kind of anti-infantry one, a 24-inch range with 6 attacks at Strength 5, AP -1 and Damage 1, though he does get Sustained Hits 3 on that, so it means the average around about 7 hits per volley under normal circumstances. The circumstances can get very abnormal very quickly though. He gives lethal hits for his lead unit, so at least 1 or 2 of those attacks might auto-wound. Once per game he gets a massive damage buff of +3 attacks and +3 strength, so that's 10 hits on average at strength 8 on that particular turn, some of them lightly auto-wounding. The Rubric Marine squad that he'll be leading grants reroll wound rolls of 1 and then rerolling all wound rolls against things on objectives, so that helps out his attacks actually wound enemy targets pretty well. The Grand Coven buff psychic damage. It can give you either a +1 to wound or devastating wounds on different turns, both of which are good damage buffs there. You can also get a +1 to hit and a +1 to wound if jumping out of a Rhino too. Again, really quite strong, and particularly if you've got full Rubric Marine wound rerolls, it means that you'll be wounding the very toughest things in the game the vast majority of the time. And then finally, for more normal things to put on him, Kabbalistic Rituals can help out in 2 ways as well. You can give him 4 rerolls to hit if you can get the higher profile. If you can get that, it makes sense to just reroll everything that isn't a 6 to fish for all of those sustained hits and auto wounds, and in particular the extra AP one is a really big boost to an AP1 profile, and even if it's only cast on the lower level. Between some combination of those, you get a pretty massive damage punch, say jumping out of a Rhino with the 4 rerolls to hit and extra AP on the go but no devastating wounds. That's around 8 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle, and that's not counting what the Rubric squad will do, as they'll have Warp Flamers with the rerolls to wound as well. Overall, between him and a squad, he can put lots of damage on the vast majority of targets, maybe being a bit more specialist against lighter stuff. If they do get engaged in melee, he does have a little melee threat as well, with some AP and lethal hits. There's plenty of other good Thousand Sons leaders that are on a similar sort of level though. The Terminator Sorcerer really seems to have come into his own after the rules changes and the Scarab Cult Terminator points decrease. He's been making appearances in a lot of competitive lists, amping up their shooting damage and helping them out in general. The Infernal Master can have lots of stats buffs on him in a similar way to the regular Sorcerer, and might be a good choice, and could be a good choice for the Eldritch Vortex enhancement. And Magnus himself is a pretty excellent commander for the faction, with vast amounts of magical damage. For the Emperor's Children, they don't exactly have many leader units, and they do have one obvious choice in the Lord Exultant to give this one to. He's an 80-point Chaos Lord equivalent, a 5-wound character who is going to be best leading Infractors. While leading those, he can get their scout rule, so can scout up the board with them to get to a more threatening position, maybe using a Rhino to do so if it makes sense, and that could extend his threat range turn 1 if you like. The squad's going to have really quite a long threat range in the first place, given Thrill Seekers for really long advance and charges. When he gets there, he's got good melee, 5 attacks at Strength 7, AP 2 and Damage 2 from the Phoenix Spear, and that has Lance as well for +1 to wound on the charge, and also a bunch of bonus Strength 4, AP 1 and damage attacks with his Rapture Lash. His own buff for his squad and himself is lethal hits, so a bunch of those attacks will be auto-wounding, and that's really quite a big deal for the volume attacks with Strength 4 and AP 1, Damage 1 from the Infractors. Lethal hits makes the difference between them actually mattering against tough stuff or not so much, and the Infractors have these sort of reroll wound rolls against objectives style rule, so that can help them out get a few more wounds, and they can buff the Lord himself as well. He might get a few more buffs from Coterie of the Conceited, maybe reroll ones to hit, or some sustained hits in later turns, and then for his big power move that he can do once per game, he gets +3 attacks and an extra pip of AP, so in his one go turn he's going to be absolutely brutal, particularly if he can charge into something on a mid-board objective. Overall it's really quite brutal damage, and for a fairly cheap points cost as well. Him plus 5 infractors is only 165 points, so a pretty reasonable chance they could kill something that's similar or greater points than themselves. Otherwise for possibilities, the Lord Cacophonist is alright with Noise Marines, Lucius is pretty strong though might often prefer to be a lone operative than go with Flawless Blades, and the Ween's Demon Prince is a fairly powerful character, but not so much of a leader. I'm not sure if his fellow Khorne Berserkers would consider him a great leader of men, but Khan the Betrayer can certainly get the job done with a squad in the World Eaters, and basically tips the balance between a 10-strong World Eaters Khorne Berserker squad from being able to handle tougher targets or not being able to. He often tends to lead 10 of them when jumping out of a Rhino to keep them safe as they move up and help them out with a slightly longer threat range. Khan's melee damage is really quite nice for the 100 points, 8 attacks at strength 7, AP 2 and damage 3, so nice enough into Terminator equivalents or tougher monsters and vehicles. In Berserker Warband, boosted up to 9 attacks at strength 9 and damage 3 on the charge. The Blessings of Khorne can help out quite a bit as well, particularly lethal hits or sustained hits will go quite a long way, both on his damage and the rest of the squad. Then for his unit, Khan grants them the ability to reroll 1s to hit and to wound. In isolation, that's a plus 36% damage buff, and it makes him really quite a powerful force multiplier, and of course makes his attacks land home with a lot more accuracy. In Berserker Warband, where he's most likely to be fielded, he's got access to Advance and Charge, extra AP, and the boosted Surge move stratagem, so some nice support for getting into melee fast and being able to hit hard when he gets there. And after he's charged in, made a mess, and maybe the opponents managed to deal with the Khorne Berserkers, he gets up on death on a 2+ for one last time. And given his scary stat line, there's a pretty reasonable chance that he's going to do some big damage to an enemy unit in quite a big way. Compared with some previous editions as well, he's not quite as murder happy on his own men as he used to be, only killing his own squad mates if he fails a leadership test and doesn't happen to be in combat with something to actually fight. Overall, he's a pretty excellent damage dealer. Maybe the biggest rival for him in terms of a leader unit in World Eaters might be the Slaughterbound, the raised 8-bound with the big hitting damage, potentially quite a good carrier of the Berserker Glaive for some damage 3 attacks. The Juggernaut Lord is worth a shout as well for big 20 blocks of Berserkers that seem to be rather fashionable in tournament lists these days. For the Chaos Demons, they felt a bit more of a struggle compared with the rest to choose a leader character for this one. The actual leader demons that go in their individual units tend to be a bit on the underwhelming side, though I feel like Be'lakor maybe fits the bill as an overall faction commander well enough, and he does actually help out the army around him in quite a big way, shrouding the demons from being shot nearby. For the models within 6 inches of him, they can't be shot greater than 18 inches away, so it basically means that if you have him start in the midst of an army, enemy gun lines really aren't going to be too happy at not being able to get a first round of shooting into the greater demons out there. That aura can be switched to other buffs with some rerolls or battle shock debuffs later if it makes more sense. He might well be getting up close and personal with the enemy and putting his melee damage to use. He gets 7 attacks at strength 14 and damage d6 plus 1, or a big 14 sweep attacks in melee, and his ranged damage output isn't nothing as well, a lot of damage 1 attacks with 12 attacks with his Betraying Shades. He does cost a lot of points, but is at least fairly tough to take down even if you can shoot him as well. 20 wounds at toughness 11 with a 4+ invulnerable save and stealth, and he can also help out the demons get to melee in a bit more of a reliable way. In Demonic Incursion, having things land within 6 inches for an easy 6-inch deep strike charge, and not even needing to use the 1 command point stratagem to get there. He does pretty well as an overarching general of chaos, and as a result makes his way into more competitive lists than not. Otherwise, beyond the greater demons, which can add a few small buffs to units nearby, maybe the Rem Master to buff Khornate melee could be worth more of a shout out. He can mark a target for Khorne units to get masses of damage against, or perhaps the Sloppity Bile Piper with the enhancement and Plague Legion is another good one, well worth the cost of inclusion with the battle shocks. Finally for Chaos, we have the Chaos Knights, again a faction that maybe doesn't really lend itself well to leader style units. For picking a sort of general or commander style one, they perhaps seem the least obvious out of any of them. Obviously they don't have leader characters due to being big stompy mech suits. The big ones do have auras, but they're not usually quite so powerful ones that they tend to get built around all that much. So it might be a bit more of a side benefit than something that really feels like they're leading units. So in absence of leader knights that tend to get used in a big way for that on the regular, I thought we'd just go for by far the single most powerful and played knight at the moment, which is the horror that is the dual Gatling Despoiler. 375 points worth of Abhorrent Knight, so a 26 wound stat line, and then just massive blazing Gatling guns that are super general purpose in Infernal Lance. At base they have 36 attacks between them at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2, so obliterate Space Marines on their raw stats alone. Infernal allows you to flex into either lethal hits or sustained hits as needed though, and in particular the lethal hits mean that they punch up really well against tough stuff due to auto wounding a bunch of times with AP 2 damage 2 shots. As a result, for competitive lists at the moment they often tend to get taken in multiples and spammed a bit in Infernal Lance, and the Gatling cannons aren't quite the end of the story as well. You've got 2 heavy flamers on it as well, a 3-shot missile launcher and the Stubber or Melter gun on the chest. Feral Lance supports them well for other things as well. There's Ignores Cover on offer for a command point, and access to a 4+ invulnerable save with Diabolic Bulwark, and one could take the Bestial Aspect enhancement as well, giving that knight the assault keyword. Between that, they're pretty intimidating force to square off against, just obliterating the enemy under masses of Gatling fire. Otherwise, for near rivals, if you wanted to go for a leader one, perhaps the Knight Desecrator will be the one to focus on. That one has a punchy anti-tank weapon and an aura of reroll ones to hit for ranged attacks for nearby war dogs, so nice enough to be able to directly buff firepower for a few there. Just for other strong Chaos Knights at the moment, the Rampager, Lancer and Abominant have all got nice enough profiles for their points. Moving on to Xenos though, and starting out with the Aeldari, we have Fugan of the Fire Dragons. Aspect warrior lists tend to be rather dominant for the Aeldari right now, and they're often headed up by the trio of Fugan, Lycus and Jainzar. Though I feel like Fugan with a big squad of 10 Fire Dragons maybe feels like the single one that's most impactful, as opposed to the other two running around with a small squad of their aspects. For the 120 points, Fugan gets you a 5 wound character with a 4+ invulnerable save, typically fielded with a maxed out squad of Fire Dragons hiding in a Wave Serpent. He himself has a fairly punchy shooting profile, one shot at strength 14, AB 4 and damage D6, though it's got a huge melter 6 on it if you can get within half range, and on a good roll that means that he personally is able to crack a single tank with one shot, and if he does take aim at tanks and monsters, he gets to benefit from the Fire Dragon's rerolls to hit wound and damage versus monsters and vehicles. He also has a dispersed profile as well, and if his unit is targeting some Space Marines or something, he can swap to some strength 8 and damage 2 attacks. Fugan makes the Fire Dragons a lot more of an intimidating unit by increasing their threat range. He gives them an extra 6 inch to their shooting, so him and the Exarch will be firing to 24 inches, the rest of the squad to 18, and that means there's a much greater chance of them being able to be somewhere safe-ish in a Wave Serpent, jump out and absolutely immolate something, and then use a stratagem from Aspect Host or War Host to jump back into that Wave Serpent, so the opponent has to get line of sight and then destroy that serpent. Otherwise next turn it'll be free to move and then for them to jump out and repeat the whole trick all over again. It is a massive investment unit, but one that's really quite hard to deal with, provided the Wave Serpent is at least being fairly cautious, and even if the opponent does manage to catch up with it, break the transport and destroy the squad inside, Fugan might be able to rescue a bit of value out of the defeat. He might be able to take a toll on enemies that tag the foe in melee with his strength 5 and damage 3 attacks, and he also has one of those revive on death rules as well. Again, a fairly powerful model to be standing up once more for one last go with a seriously powerful gun. As mentioned, otherwise Lycus with being able to jump really far with the Warp Spiders and then charge in alongside a Power Blade array Exarch is rather nice, and Jainzar rushing alongside a small squad of Howling Banshees can be pretty brutal for enemy infantry units. Perhaps for other ones, Eldrad Ulthuan is also worth a shout out to, perhaps most commonly seen camping a home field objective with some Storm Guardians, rustling up command points and maybe dooming the odd unit. For Drukhari, it hasn't been so long since their new codex went into effect. Quite a lot of their limited roster of leader characters seem to be pretty effective, though one that's pretty well a staple in the majority of lists is the new Lady Malice model, maybe seeming a little bit more borderline at 115 points that she was printed at, but with the 100 point cost from the digital points, she does bring really quite a lot to the table. For that investment, you get a character Archon with 5 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save. Compared with her peers, she has quite a lot of punchy melee, 6 attacks at strength 5, AP 3 and damage 3 with devastating wounds, though it is hazardous as well, and gets a few more anti-infantry style attacks with that serrated fan. For her abilities, she gets to redeploy 3 units or put them into strategic reserves, usually worth a few points in itself, and that one tends to be particularly helpful with infiltrator units such as Mandrakes in particular, allowing you to reposition after you've seen where the enemy has put their models down. She then has one of the auras of +1 command points for nearby enemy stratagems, again very handy particularly if she's playing at least somewhat aggressively into the midfield. That's probably likely to happen with that damage profile and going with some Incubi. And then she has a pain token buff for her unit. If activated with some power from pain, then you get either sustained or lethal hits on the squad's damage output, which helps round them out against some tougher targets potentially, in addition to activating any of the benefits of the squad she's leading. If Incubi, then some devastating wounds. Overall, that makes her really quite a strong all-rounder that's good in most attachments. The redeploy thing is useful enough, she's got some good melee and an alright damage buff, and that command point debuff is also pretty big in itself. Otherwise though, looks like lots of the other characters are getting some play. Archons are in the majority of lists as well. Both Lilith Hesperax and the standard Succubus are doing rather well, as is Drazar for another big hitter to lead some Incubi. For the Tyranids, they have a fair few commander monsters, though I've gone for the Neurotyrant, which is both one of those and can lead units, and is perhaps one of the most commonly selected out of all of them in top lists. The great big Eldritch Horror Zoanthrope style thing from the Leviathan box set is a toughness 8 9 wound monster with a 4+ invulnerable save, and perhaps surprisingly cheap to field in game for what's supposed to be a command organism in theory. For his leader abilities, he's often seen backing up a squad of Zoanthropes for some punchy anti-tank, quite helpful for the Tyranids that tend to be a little bit more lacking in that regard. Under the Neurotyrant's leadership, you can get to hit on a 2+ with them, which is fairly scary stuff, and they also have lethal hits on their las cannon style profiles, potentially swapping them out for anti-infantry style blast attacks. If they target something that's battle shocked, maybe from a Neurolictor or Shadow in the Warp, then you also get +1 to wound as well, and that'll make a very scary squad for anti-armor duties. The Neurotyrant also helps them keep firing as well, as you get big guns never tire in the unit. For some reason, Games Workshop FAQ'd it, so the sort of vehicle monster keyword thing confers to the individual Zoanthropes, quite a powerful ability to keep them shooting when they're so valuable. And you could use these subterranean assault detachments to help get the alpha strike with them, as they really want to be hitting the enemy rather than the other way around. You could use tunnel markers to get some lines of sight, and that detachment also allows you to reroll hit rolls of 1 as well, and that doesn't hurt when you're hitting on a 2+ anyway. Otherwise, beyond that, you get a board-wide debuff to Shadow in the Warp, -1 to the battle shock test that your opponent's forced to take, and that's quite a good tipping point with a fair few more units likely to fail if the Neurotyrant is around. Occasionally that could mean some command points or prevented stratagems. It can help maintain synapse to units within 18 inches, potentially marking them with synapse before they go charging off out of range. It also does have some of its own damage as well. 2d6, strength 5, AP 1 and damage 2 torrent attacks, enough to account for a few space marines at least, and not too bad after the value of the shadow buff and the synapse. It means the unit can be really quite good for Overwatch with a punchy torrent, and particularly so if backed up by Zoanthropes with lethal hits. Overall, it's rarely a bad choice in an army list, whether or not it's leading Zoanthropes. Otherwise, for big character possibilities, both the Swarmlord and the On-Foot Hive Tyrant are really quite strong. The Swarmlord's got way more popular in recent times with its command point things and damage profile. The Trigon Prime is rather powerful as an alpha beast in Subterranean Assault, and for another leader character, the Broodlord is worth a mention, or very scary when charging in alongside a massed up squad of Genestealers, particularly in the Vanguard Onslaught detachment. For their cultist allies, we have the Genestealer Cults, and for their leader character, I went for the Biophagus. I probably would have gone for the Primus prior to the updates that they had. The Biophagus didn't really change though, and still provides excellent value. He's a cheap 3-wound support character, capable of joining the Acolyte variants, Metamorphs or Aberrants. The Biophagus basically makes these guys more dangerous in close combat. He grants you lethal hits in melee. That's pretty great for both the Metamorphs or the Aberrants, plus the Acolytes with the heavy mining weapons. In particular, it's going to make them far more efficient at punching up against tough things like monsters and vehicles. On top of that, once per battle, he can also grant 1 turn of a +1 to wound against infantry, so it means that he's got good value into multiple different targets. Then beyond that, he's a cheaper character that can bear enhancements. There's an easy charge delivery one in the Host of Ascension. He can infiltrate in Biosantic Brood Surge, and just being a Biophagus in those units can allow you to use the detachment buffs. And then finally, he does have a small personal melee threat as well. Usually just the 1 attack, but he gets 1 turn of more efficient poisoning, 4 attacks at strength 2, AP 0 and damage D3+3 with anti-infantry 2+, so while armor might protect the foe, any saves that they do fail are going to fail in a big way. Overall, I feel like for the 50 points, he's one of the most efficient character leaders for the Genestealer Cults now. For other possibilities, the Patriarch itself is quite nice in Biosantic Brood Surge with the damage enhancement for it, and the Primus and Benefactors are both pretty nice with Neophyte blocks, maybe in the Host of Ascension or perhaps the Final Day. For the Tau, most of the options in their codex are usable enough. Maybe for the standout leader characters though, it's probably the 2 battlesuit commanders at the moment, either the Cold Star or the Enforcer. These guys go in one of the 3 different variant Crisis Suit units, and both make the unit a bit more big and scary and efficient for using stratagems and damage buffs on. They've got a fair amount of firepower in themselves, with potentially 4 weapons hitting on ballistic skill 3+, unless you want to trade one out for a shield generator perhaps. They could have one of those weapons as the Cyclic Ion Blaster as well, which is fairly shooty up close. They can take similar sort of weapon profiles to the squads that they're joining, and can use the same damage buffs that the squads get, such as the Sunforge rerolls against vehicles, or Fire Knife and the hit rerolls. Those units can often be some of the better damage combos in their different detachments, as if there's any enhancement that amps up damage or defense, it's likely to be more useful on Crisis Suits versus elsewhere. They're good enough to get used in both Montcar and Kauyon, though in particular they stand out in Retaliation Cadre or Experimental Prototype Cadre with the fun damage enhancements for those using it. Then for the 2 different types, the Cold Star is slightly more expensive, comes with a high output burst cannon which is nice enough, particularly in Star Scythe units, and that one makes their unit move far faster. A big movement 12 inches with the assault keywords to keep you firing while you advance, so it can be quite nice to deliver crisis suits while they're on the board. The Enforcer might be a bit more tempting for a deep strike crisis unit. It gets a 2+ save, makes the squad a little tougher by worsening AP against them. It does slow down the unit to 8-inch movement for its own profile, but still could be the right choice with the lower cost. Otherwise for Tau, the majority of their other leader units are nice enough. Farsight's looking far more tempting after a points cut. Commander Shadowsun, the Fireblade and the Ethereal are all usable enough in their own ways too. For the Necrons, I've given it to the Technomancer, the 80-point Cryptek that can lead the Canoptek Wraiths into battle. I feel like for standout value from any one support character, he gives more than most, being part of the combo that's one of the most commonly played Necrons competitive units. The format for these guys is 1 Technomancer and a big squad of 6 Wraiths. They're 4 wounds apiece at toughness 6, a 3+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, so fairly chunky in their own right, and move fairly fast with some bullying sort of damage, not standout threats, but should be able to take out lighter or medium infantry units fairly easily. The Technomancer makes the Wraiths extra tough though. He grants them a 5+ feel no pain, which is nice on that profile with an invulnerable save anyway, and makes their reanimation protocols a bit more valuable as well, given that the wounds that get restored are even harder to take off with the feel no pain. On top of that, he can double down on the healing, either healing the Wraiths or something else nearby for D3 wounds at the end of your movement phase. If the squad's partly healed up, that could be another big win, and it feels like they're a unit that's really quite relevant to multiple detachments. They can get good use out of the damage buff from Star Shatter. They'll have quite a lot going for them in Awakened, with a +1 to hit, the option to bear the Netherrealm Casket for stealth, and the reactive reanimation stratagem could make the unit yet more annoying to kill. In Canoptek Court, you're quite likely to see something like 18 Wraiths running up the table. They get lots of bonuses and stratagem support, and one unit can infiltrate too. Otherwise for leaders, the Necrons have lots of usable ones. Orican the Diviner is strong with a 20-strong block of warriors, giving them all invulnerable saves, maybe being paired with a Royal Warden. Imitek the Stormlord has a bit of close range threat and farms command points, maybe nice with Lichguard. The Scorpet Lord often pairs with a squad of 3 destroyers for a nicely dangerous melee threat that hits elite infantry rather hard. And while the Silent King himself doesn't attach to units, he's still an incredibly strong Necron centerpiece and buffs a lot of units nearby with his rerolls. Next up, we've got the Orks, and after the changes to what he can lead, the big boss Ghazghkull Thrasher himself has been given a new lease of life. 235 points for the big boss, and now he's able to attach 2 regular boys squads, so you don't need 2 running with Mega Knobs. The boss has 10 wounds at toughness 6 with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, and you get him plus Makari as well in the same offering. An extra model that can tank a whole bunch of damage with a 2+ invulnerable save, potentially some quite meaningful big hits there if possible. After the attachment rules change, he often joins boys alongside a pain boy or a big mech. The pain boy can make the squad tougher, or the big mech can have them advance forward more reliably with the special rules. Ghazghkull has really quite big hitting damage output. 6 attacks at strength 14, AP 3 and damage 4 on his base profile, or mass sweeps at strength 8 and damage 2. That profile can get an awful lot of buffs though. A +1 to hit and wound if he's leading a unit, which he usually will be. So that means that his attacks will be landing very accurately and wounding most of the time, and he grants that to the boys that he's leading as well. And that's pretty fearsome with the sheer amount of chopper profiles that they have. If he's playing in Warhorde, he'll get sustained hits 1 as well, so another way to amp up the carnage there. And in the Turn of the War, things go really next level. Him and the entire squad will get +1 strength and attack. They'll be able to get into melee more easily, and then on top of that, Makari gives you an aura of lethal hits that could help other units, and Ghazghkull's own unit get critical hits on a 5+, potentially helpful for those lethal hits, and doubly so for sustained hits in Warhorde. Overall, between all that, he's a great big central damage dealer of a unit that can take down the enemy's toughest stuff out there, though it's quite significantly better in the War compared with outside it. For other possibilities, both the regular War Boss and the Beast Boss on foot are both nice, leading up either Knobs Breaker Boys or Beast Snagger Boys. And for other Orky HQs, Snickrot's well worth a shout out. He can lead commandos potentially, though in reality he's best off fighting as a lone operative. Then finally for the Xenos factions, we have the Leagues of Votann and Uthar the Destined. He's a 95-point named Carl with 5 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save. The main reason that he's quite so efficient is that he reduces the cost of stratagems nearby within 12 inches. Really quite a big deal, as he could be putting that on very effective units, massed up ranged infantry like Ironkin Steeljacks or Brockir Thunderkin, or great big Hexagon land fortresses. If you can stay with that aura in place for the majority of the game and keep safe for the first few turns, then that's all well and good. If the enemy does get too close and push on the home positions though, he's got some melee with strength 6, AP 3 and damage 2 with devastating wounds. He can sacrifice yield points to automatically make 1 a 6 if it makes sense to. And might be nice hanging out with a Hearthkin Warrior squad on the home field, as they can put their sticky objectives rule on the home field, and then potentially late game push up to the mid board and get their OC and Uthar's melee profile to work, when scoring your last few points are the main thing that matters. If she's going for one character in one specific detachment though, it might well be the Brockir Ironmaster with the Trivarg Cyber implant in the Bramfast Oathbands. That one can basically allow you to get sustained hits too on the Brockir Thunderkin most of the time, and as they get critical hits on a 4+ with conversion beamers, that's just pretty monstrous damage. Otherwise, for commonly played characters, the Memnir Strategist is very nice, again just perhaps helpful hiding on a homeboard objective, or potentially joining some Steeljacks for some free Overwatch if you'd like, though he isn't always necessarily used as a leader. That's about it for this one though. Let me know your thoughts as to leaders and characters within Warhammer 40k. Which ones would you rank as best for your faction and why? I look forward to hearing any of your thoughts and takes down in the comments. That's about it for this one, though before I go, I'll just cycle back to Tabletop Stronghold, the video sponsor, and talk through a few examples of their range of magnetic carry cases. In their cases, they have these steel trays that can be fitted in at different levels. Here's roughly how many miniatures that you can fit on each one, around about 90 odd 25mm bases, 30 Terminators or 6 Knight Armigers. Then those trays go in different mag cases of different sizes and heights. This is the smallest mini one at £72 or $75 with the 80/25 code that they gave me for when they're not on sale. That price includes shipping, though there might be VAT or import duties depending on where you live around the world. The mini one's still got a fair bit of room in it though. You can see a Sicaran and Spartan on the ground floor there, and plenty of Terminators in the upper one. Then there's the regular issue mag case. This one's £114 or $120, quite a lot taller and should be better for most armies out there. There's room for some quite tall models here, as demonstrated by the Chaos Knight hanging out on the ground floor. Each of these come with a supply of magnets inside them as well to mount on the miniature bases, and I'll leave the dimensions of the cases on the screen. Then they have a really big one as well in the XL one, which should be big enough for certain entire collections worth of miniatures. You can see a Baneblade on the top left there. It's basically two of the previous attached together. Then finally, as mentioned earlier, they do have a competitive terrain set as well. If you're in the market for some MDF terrain, they have some bundles that have that a bit cheaper if you pick up a mag case. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. If you'd like to take a look over their range, you can check them out, links down in the video description. That's about it for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.